Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Inside the Marble Palace, Post Media Saskatchewan's look at the goings on at the Saskatchewan legislature and around the province right now. I'm Murray Mandrick, political columnist for the Regina Leader Post. Joining me, as always, Jeremy Symes, our legislative reporter for the Leader Post and Star Phoenix, and familiar face, Adam Hunter, CBC provincial affairs reporter in Saskatchewan. Hi, Adam. Hi, Jeremy. Nice to see you guys. Another
Thanks.
crazy week.
Yeah.
Let's start with the craziness of the premier basically calling on the province to consider, or to consider himself, I guess, proposing joining the lawsuit or court action on the Emergencies Act in Ottawa. Jeremy, you did this story. Can you explain what the premier's thinking is and why he wants to proceed along this route for something, I guess, that pretty much isn't in place in Saskatchewan because it hasn't been utilized. But well, let's try and understand a bit as to what Premier Scott Moe is thinking here.
Yeah, for sure. So the province here is considering legal action against the federal government for this Emergency Act, which is going through the Senate right now, but it was invoked by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau a while back. And essentially, why they're wanting to fight the federal government on this is about this idea of freedoms for people. They do feel that it could, infringe on the freedoms of people in Saskatchewan, and they obviously don't like that. Politically, it's also just another battle for them to go against the Trudeau government and, create that political conflict, if you will. But for them personally, what they're saying is, freedoms are at stake here in a way, and we don't like that. And we think, and then we also think too that that law enforcement or police could handle this. You don't need to do an Emergencies Act to uh, quell whatever all these protests, all these convoys, that sort of thing. We have capable law enforcement, so that's where they stand on that.
Is there a sense how far down the road the premier is towards implementing this? Because sometimes governments do and say things for reasons other than actually doing them. They want public reaction to them, the old trial balloon theory. But is there a sense right now that this is somewhat further down the road than maybe we understand?
I'm not sure. I don't know how far they really want to go with this. I know that, I mean, I asked about the costs that this might cost the government. They didn't provide that estimate, but they said it would be worked in their regular budgets through the Justice Ministry. We saw Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, I think he was the first one that said, I'm gonna do could consider doing some legal action. And so we're seeing Scott Moe and the Sask party jump on board with that. We've already seen the Canadian Civil Liberties Association also file a suit against the government for this, and they're basically saying, again, people's rights to assembly and that sort of thing are being infringed by this, and that the federal government didn't reach a threshold in order to, I guess, enact or invoke this Emergencies Act. They didn't give a really good reason as to why this is needed. And we are hearing that from the province too. They are also saying we agree that they didn't set that threshold, and so it's not needed.
Well, Adam, I get two factors. One of which is that all of us should be somewhat nervous or concerned about any government, particularly a federal government, issuing something with this broad powers related to assembly, related to other things. This is a serious measure that Ottawa took when it invoked this particular act, and when the House of Commons later uh, validated it. However, the problem that I'm having right now is that this seems to go well beyond the issue of civil liberties and maybe even the libertarian view. We saw for two consecutive summers all kinds of protests in front of the Saskatchewan legislature related to justice for our stolen children, followed up by Tristan DeRochia's protest related to both of which were the TP protests, as we call them, both of which were related to northern issues, northern suicide rates. On both occasions, provincial government, through the Provincial Capital Commission, tried to use either police involvement in breaking up the demonstration and dismantling uh, both TP protests, and even went in the second case to court. To actually went to court in both cases actually, but second case unsuccessfully to court to break it up. So I guess what I need to know and better understand, what I think the public needs to understand, is that how can Scott Moe justify uh, moving forward in support of the protesters in Ottawa when he seemed to take a very different approach with the protesters that were across the lawn, across the street on another lawn in front of the very legislature, people of which he chose not to meet with. Can you give us a bit of background or a little bit of thought in terms of who this notion that Scott Moe is putting forward will appeal to? Because obviously politicians don't do these things unless they have a reason to do them, and one of the reasons that they do most things is because of popularity. So who's Scott Moe trying to appeal to right now, and how much of a contradiction is it compared with what he's done and said in the past?
I think the issue here is, the federal government jurisdiction, and he calls it an overreach, and this is something that we need to go back to, the carbon tax case to see sort of some similarities there, and the language is very similar as well. So when the provincial government here in Saskatchewan thinks the federal government's gone too far in an issue, they have threatened legal actions, in some cases going through with that legal action all the way to the Supreme Court. So that's not surprising to me. The fact that the Liberal government's doing it and the Conservative Party of Canada is opposing it. Scott Moe is closely aligned with the Conservative Party of Canada, obviously Jason Kenney on many issues. So that makes it, more sellable to his base, to people here in Saskatchewan. And I think the question about the Emergencies Act going forward now, and this is something that Scott Moe raised initially when he said he had an issue with it, was why is it applying to Saskatchewan? Why doesn't it apply in a province or a jurisdiction that needs that help? So if it's downtown Ottawa, if it's Coots, if it's wherever this problem comes up, that it shouldn't be applied across the country. Now the issue with that is, of course, that, and Jeremy I know wrote about this, is that we have the SGI and others that are now tied into this Emergencies Act because of the issues of licenses and registrations and insurance of vehicles that may have been involved in the convoy or in the protests in Ottawa, and that now ensnares Saskatchewan in this, whether they want to be involved or not. And when asked about it, the premier kind of said, well, we'll have to look into that. As it relates to the protests outside the legislature, many people have pointed out that the premier's message on protests in general, whether it be the Wet'suwet'en protests, solidarity protests, or protests at the legislature, compared to what's happening in Ottawa, convoys, or the convoy back a couple of years ago, that he's been more vocal of support in some cases of protest, or not so being quite vocal against them in other cases. And he said last week to the media that he's been consistent about that. He says when there's something illegal happening, that he's against it and the police should handle it. That's not always been the case, though. There has been stronger language, and the premier, at least this time around, didn't announce the protests when he was given the chance to. He actually said, to CBC in an interview, that they're getting a lot of attention, and that he wasn't going to judge them or tell them what to do. And that's a lot different than what we've heard from others, including premiers across the country, when these blockades were costing the Canadian economy billions of dollars because of cross-border goods not flowing, things having to be shut down. So I think it's one of those lines that you have to watch what the premier's saying, and listen closely, because depending on the issue, he may take a slightly different stance or have a different position. And in this case, people are pointing out that he has a different message depending on where the protests are. He'll say it's been consistent on whether someone's breaking the law. He's been against that consistently.
Well, let's explore that, because isn't it a matter of which laws are being broken? In the case of both the Justice for Our Stolen Children TP protests and Tristan DeRoche's protest, it was a situation where we're dealing with uh, bylaws being broken in terms of the Wascana Center Authority. You're not allowed to camp overnight in the park. You're not allowed to set fires in the park for camping reasons outside designated areas. And I get all that, but that's significantly less significant than what we're seeing in Ottawa right now. Is protester after protester, particularly in regard to the leadership, is being dragged before the courts and being held to account right now in some form or the other. Obviously, these are just allegations right now. They'll have their day in court, etc. But there was no criminal charges against Tristan DeRoche or other protesters in relation to that. And at least in one situation, in the Justice for Stolen Children camp, the police literally dragged some of the protesters out at the behest of government and such. So we're not dealing with a situation where we're dealing with the same level of charges. I guess my question is, why is that not factoring into Scott Moe's concern and thinking? Or is it just because maybe that's not factoring into the public thought process at this particular point? I guess it might be at some point or the other, but it seems massively inconsistent to basically argue that the protesters in Ottawa, 2,600 kilometers away, are somehow more worthy or more justifiable when they are breaking criminal code laws, and the ones right across the street from you somehow weren't worthy of their level of protest when there was really no serious laws being broken. I guess I'm most interested in trying to understand who is going to really like what Scott Moe is doing right now in terms of this relative inconsistency. Is it more of the notion that anything he throws at Justin Trudeau seems to stick these days? Is that the situation? I assume there's a pretty broad base appeal throughout Saskatchewan of anything critical of Justin Trudeau because he's not popular out here.
I think he nailed it. I think that's been Scott Moe's, MO since he became premier, since he became leader of the Saskatchewan Party, targeting Prime Minister Trudeau as the person that he was going to oppose with his "Just Watch Me" speech. And throughout his last 4 years, Mariano, we've been to multiple media opportunities where Scott Moe is, his main beef has been with the Liberal government or Prime Minister Trudeau. Many a letter has been sent out. I think this is just another, part of that evolution. It's a bit different because, as Jeremy mentioned, there are other groups that are opposing the use of the Emergencies Act. It's not just, from a conservative right, let's say. And we'll have to wait and see if this lasts longer. There's also, the question about whether it should be in place right now that the protests have been cleared off. What's the point? Wasn't the point to clear the protests off? Those questions are being asked as well. But when you see, Jason Kenney, Scott Moe, the Conservative Party of Canada, all aligned, it's not surprising. It'll depend on whether we see another blockade or another convoy or another protest, and how long the Emergencies Act lasts for. But again, I think Scott Moe, he's been pointing to this being an issue because it affects Saskatchewan, and it is in place in Saskatchewan because it's a national act, and he thinks it should only apply to certain provinces where this is being an issue.
It really makes one wonder. But Scott Moe is really dealing with some good times for Scott Moe right now, in the sense that the NDP are having their own trouble. Last week, as we talked about, Ryan Miley tendered his resignation as NDP leader pending the leadership race. Since then, we've had a few new developments related to who wants to come forward and run and who doesn't. We know that Charlie Clark, Mayor of Saskatoon, and Trent Witherspoon, who's the longest serving MLA in the Sask Party caucus, are both bowing out. Right now, though, that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue as the challenge to the general direction of the party and concerns over why Ryan Miley was the. Tell us the story because you wrote about it,
Sure.
Jeremy, and why this is so problematic for the NDP right now.
Yeah, for sure. Like right now, the rifts that we're seeing with the NDP are coming into public display. So what happened was Deanna Ogle, who was the vice president for the NDP, she resigned and she said on Twitter that she believes that some people in caucus and some people in the NDP executive undermined Ryan Miley, even though he was elected as their leader for the party. She alleges, many party members are stuck in this quote unquote Romano era where, there's too many old timers, traditionalists who are holding back, I guess you could say, these younger members who are more energized, want new ideas, want new things for the party to put forward. But the party itself, these newer, more maybe activist members are saying is kind of old and stuck and is not willing to move in that direction. So she resigned. In response, the President Sheila Whalen of the NDP defended the party. She said that was not her experience, that Ryan Miley was undermined. She was saying, we have programs where older members are mentoring younger members, and I really don't see these issues that Deanna is bringing. Anyways, I also spoke with Sally Hauser about this. She's kind of a well-known NDP operative, and she's saying it's quite common for divisions in parties to happen. We see them all the time, and we see them especially after maybe a leader resigns. This is when people want to evaluate everything and parse out what went wrong. So that's nothing really new for a party to go through this. It's just we're really seeing it happen publicly right now. And I mean, this is a sidebar too. There seems to be this group of people out there, kind of grassroots. I don't know if they're NDP members, but they're coming together. They're talking about this idea of how to move the NDP forward. Do we need a new political party? Do we need a new progressive movement? They argue the brand of the NDP does not sit well with people in rural Saskatchewan and other people generally. They want to get rid of that baggage and just rebrand it. It's happened before. We saw the CCF turn into the NDP. You could argue the Sask Party was kind of a rebrand from the Grant Devine Tory government. And yeah, so there's a lot of those discussions happening right now, but it is happening publicly, which
Adam,
is
why
probably not great for the NDP.
this is interesting, and I'm wondering, Adam, why is this going to be particularly hard for the NDP? Because I think it will be. You're dealing with a party with a 75-year history that still loves to cling to its past and its past success, not just Tommy Douglas, but Alan Blakeney and Roy Romano, Lauren Calvert era, where they were very successful, offering somewhat more of what we might call a centrist view of how to run Saskatchewan. What Jeremy describes is in contradiction to that, obviously, in terms of where some people in the party generally want the direction to go. I don't get how a party that is serious about wanting to form government can't understand in a farm-based, mineral-based, oil-based economy like Saskatchewan that there's going to be massive resistance in that direction. There already has been on the carbon tax and several other things. Where do you see the problems for the NDP moving forward in relation to the notion that you're going to have some people in this leadership fight, quite obviously, that's coming up, that are going to demand the party move further left versus some people that are, as Jeremy described, wanting it to rebrand in another way that might be more centrist. So how problematic do you think that is going to be for the NDP?
Everyone I've talked to so far since the Ryan Miley's news is broken has said the party needs to unite and it needs to grow. And that's tough if you're being pulled in these different directions. If you're talking about rebranding, if you're talking about moving further to the left, you correctly point out that the Romano NDP, they weren't further left. Now we have the Saskatchewan party who people have said is moving further to the right. The Brad Wall government um, uh, uh, with under Scott Moe. So we have this juxtaposition of people saying, well, we need to go get more of the people in the center to vote for us. We need to grab more of those people. But if you have people within the party saying, no, we have to move further to the left, then there is going to be that conflict that Jeremy described. The issue that NDP has is a math issue. Uh, they don't have enough members. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough support. They don't have enough caucus members. They don't have a real foothold anywhere outside of Regina and Saskatoon. And I think the Athabasca by-election proved that they don't have a safe seat anymore. And when you put all those things together, the job of the next leader and the job of the party is quite difficult, because you need to find someone that's going to do something that Ryan Miley wasn't able to do, which is invigorate the party, get people to sign up, get people to go door knock, build the brand back up, whether that's under an NDP banner or under another banner. And it doesn't sound like the people inside the party right now have any interest in rebranding. They've already kind of pushed that aside when they did a review following the last election, when they, were left with the same amount of seats they went in with. Now they have fewer seats because of that by-election loss. And you're going to have now in the next, few months here, a lame duck leader who's going to have to stand up and, sell policies and sell ideas of the party when he wasn't able to sell that to the public, and he had to step down. So they're in a tough spot. They're the next, leadership race. I also talked to Sally, as Jeremy mentioned, for a story I'm working on, and who may be one of the next candidates. No one's kind of totally dove into the pool yet, but we're starting to see names emerge. And I think, something Sally said was, you need to have someone from outside caucus at least join the leadership race, because that's a way to get more people involved. That's a way to fundraise money. If you have a bigger leadership race, we saw this with the Saskatchewan party. They were able to raise more money because they had this large leadership race. If you just have one or two people, you're not going to, and especially if they're just already in caucus, I don't know if that's going to be something that winds up people to come join the party, to come join the cause. So it's going to be it's a bit of an uphill climb, obviously. And Ryan Miley, I think, outlined a lot of the challenges in some of his exit interviews with media, saying, some of the things that he faced, which, in one place is got the NDP was the voice of having measures, having public health measures. And he said, that's one of the things that's hampered him, that he had to wear that a little bit, even though he says, he stood by those positions. And when he made those calls, he says they were the right ones. So that's the other thing the NDP is going to have to go forward on, is whoever the next leader is, they're still going to have to wear some of that stuff that, Ryan Miley was tagged with by the Saskatchewan party.
It gets complicated really quickly because of that. And on that front, Brad Wall didn't have a leadership race. The Sask party was very successful under that. Scott Moe did, and the Sask party was still very successful. So there is a lot to explore in the NDP ranks in terms of what their brand is right now and what might actually work in terms of choosing someone that's actually going to attract attention to the party and the support they need to be something other than 12 or 13 members that they have right now. Love to talk about this more, but I think this is about all the time we have. Adam, Jeremy, thanks so much, and we'll see you on next time in Inside the Marble Palace.
Thanks, Murray. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks.